Well, welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 11 of Prince Caspian, The Lion Roars.
And this is a really, really good chapter.
It is? You think
Yes.
so?
Oh, yes.
I do like it. It's kind of short, honestly. It's my Kindle, as I often refer to, said it was only 8 minutes for me to read.
I'm curious what your summary will be like. Because my summary would be, Lucy wakes everyone up. They don't want to go. They decide to go. They don't see Aslan. And Aslan takes a walk, and then everyone sees him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's hear yours.
Well, here's mine. So before we do that, in the last episode, Lucy observed the trees awakening, and she spoke with Aslan, and he gave her the charge of going and waking her siblings, even though she knows that they're not going to be, all too happy to have her wake them up in the middle of the night. So here is chapter 11. Lucy returns to the camp and attempts to wake her siblings. Although they are grumbling and groggy, the company decides to follow Lucy as she in turn follows Aslan. At first, only Lucy can see Aslan, but as they continue their journey, Edmund and Peter begin to see him too. Once they reach Aslan's house, the entire company can see Aslan, who greets each person differently. Aslan sends Peter, Edmund, and Trumpkin to take care of things at Aslan's house. With Susan and Lucy at his side, Aslan roars. At the sound of the great lion, trees come forward to jump and dance in front of Aslan. Joining this merry group are Bacchus and Silenus, who cause grapes to grow all over the wood. As they watch the dancing ensue and the refreshments be poured, Susan mentions that she wouldn't feel very safe without Aslan there.
Good summary.
That's all, just good?
Yeah,
It's not good enough for you anymore,
was-
Phil.
That was a better summary than what I said. I'm glad you read that.
No, but I do like that. It sounds like we're bragging on ourselves because we made the show, but I like that we go back and forth. It's really fun because you and I have very different takes often on things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know who, at the end of the entire podcast series, will have done the most summaries?
It'll be even, right?
No. I think that you'll have done more.
Because I do odd chapters, and sometimes
there's more odd chapters.
That's correct. Okay.
I think so.
I actually planned that out myself because I like my chapter summaries better. I'm just kidding.
When I was a kid growing up, I would pray on the odd days, and my sister would pray on the even days. I always prayed more.
You're going to get an extra,
I don't know what I get, but I'm looking
gem
forward
on
to
your
it.
crown in heaven. Yeah. Well, I really do. My first takeaway from this chapter is it does a really big shift once Aslan roars. And with the arrival of Bacchus and Silenus and the trees, I mean, this is like, it's weird. I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's kind of like traditional, what we've come to know and love from Narnia. They get to talk to Aslan. Trumpkin even sees him, and all that stuff's really fun. We get some great Aslan dialogue, but there at that pivot after the two boys and Trumpkin head off to Aslan's house, it is something we've never really seen here in Narnia before. Was it something you enjoyed, or something that kind of took you out of the story because it is so different?
I think that it kept me in the story, but it was different. And I think that we're going to continue to see this. Maybe by the 7th book, it'll be a little bit different, because we'll be used to Lewis's writing and things will be a little more solidified. But It seems like this book just gets more and more different from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I'm not upset about it.
So it's not turning you off or anything. You're just like, okay, cool, let's keep going.
I'm not the biggest fan of all the tree stuff.
Not into trees.
That's going on.
All right.
I guess I don't fully understand it.
Do you want to go on record as being anti-tree?
I do not.
Okay, that's
I love
fine.
trees. I'm a tree hugger, but it just seemed like a very odd scene. Like Aslan takes him through this whole thing, and then there's a big party and a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of mentions of donkeys, or one donkey, someone on a donkey, and that sound. I'm not really sure how it fits, so I'm curious to see what happens.
Did you not believe there were donkeys in Narnia? You're like, yeah, talking bears, talking lion, all this stuff, but a donkey, that is too far, Lewis. I cannot believe that.
I did make a note. I was like, I guess the donkey's just an animal.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get there. You're right. It is a very odd party that takes place here. We're not there yet. I do have some ideas about what's going on. I've pulled from people who are much smarter than you and I as well to share some of their thoughts.
Impossible.
But before we get there, let's talk about what's happening as the chapter begins. So Lucy goes, she's waking up her siblings, and she has a great line just to start the chapter off. She says, I do hope, she says this in a trembling voice, that you will all come with me because I'll have to go with him whether anyone else does or not. And I love this kind of start to the chapter. Lucy has really taken up the mantle of, she is bearing the mantle of the faith for all of the siblings. Edmund has faith in Lucy, but Lucy is the only one really believing and trusting in Aslan at this point. Mm-hmm. It kind of feels like we're repeating ourselves a little bit. Although this is so different than Wardrobe, it's kind of like, come on, have they not figured this out by now?
Right, and I wonder if that's how people feel about us.
Yeah,
sometimes
it's like when you open up scripture and you're reading about the Israelites, like, are you serious?
Yeah. But then I also think about last week or 4 weeks ago when God took care of something and it was great, but now I'm worried about whatever's next.
Yeah, I know. I feel like a lot of times in life, you and I being in our late 20s, as we kind of look into life, I feel like often I'm like, oh man, this is this new kind of, life obstacle I've got to go through. And even though God's literally taking care of me every single time, I was like, oh, but maybe it's this time that he lets me down. It's like, come on, I should know better. And so I'm frustrated with especially Peter and Susan.
I'm really frustrated with Susan. She has the worst attitude right now, and she should know better. And she's getting older, and it feels like she's getting worse.
But we really should probably identify with her the most, right?
Yeah, and maybe that's why I'm so critical of her, is because she's displaying the traits that I am ashamed of.
Well, let's talk about Susan for a bit, because this happens throughout the chapter, and I honestly had a question that this is going a little bit ahead of us, but since we're talking about Susan, do you think C.S. Lewis is trying to make us dislike Susan here? There's even a point where Lewis, as the narrator, refers to Lucy as Peter's favorite sister. So it's weird. Like, it seems like nobody likes Susan. She is very annoying in this chapter, and not just, she's like Edmund complaining. She's literally she's not, in my opinion, she's not doing this exactly, but she's coming up to being antagonistic towards them and being in opposition to Aslan by how much she is pushing back against this journey they're going to take to follow Aslan. I mean, do you feel any of that?
I do, but I associated it with age. It seems like as they're getting older, they're becoming more like adults, and not all adults, but it seems like a lot of adults start to kind of lose some of the ability to believe some things, or just I think they're more likely to take matters into their own hands and try to control stuff because they have control and they also have responsibility.
So what you're saying is that Susan seems to be very obsessed with growing up.
It seems like Peter and Susan are growing up. They're further along the growing up trail. When
we finish this series, let's come back and talk about it. I can't say anything else.
I don't think they're going to be invited back.
I know you know that, but there's even more that I will plead the fifth. That's not. I don't need to do that. You're not asking me anything, but I will withhold any other information for now.
That is illegal.
Well, as they're deciding what to do, I'm going to read a little bit of the chapter here because the dwarf Trumpkin, he has a really great line of dialogue here. And let me just go ahead and read this as they're trying to decide. They even asked, they said, what does the DLF say as they're trying to figure out what to do? And here's what he says.
"Oh, I say nothing at all,"
answered the dwarf.
"If you all go, of course, I'll go with you. But if your party splits up, I'll go with the High King. That's my duty to him and King Caspian. But if you ask my private opinion, I'm a plain dwarf who doesn't think there's much chance of finding a road by night where you couldn't find one by day. And I have no use for magic lions, which are talking lions and don't talk, and friendly lions, though they don't do us any good, and whopping big lions, though nobody can see them. It's all bilge and beanstalks as far as I can see."
I love Trumpkin. He's really becoming... I really am starting to like him more than I even did before.
A fierce amount of loyalty, but without an ounce of belief right now.
Absolutely. That's such a great way to put it. I mean, he is like, I'll stick by you guys, even though all of y'all are crazy.
Yeah, I don't believe this at all, but you're the king. It's a really interesting, unique trait for him.
I also just enjoy, he's like, I don't have any use for this magic lion which can talk, but he's not talking, and a friendly lion that's not helping us, and one that is supposed to be really big, but nobody can actually see it. I love that he just points out kind of what seems to not make any sense at all, but he's like, but look, if you guys go, I'm with you. What he would be a Hufflepuff, right? I mean, he is so loyal.
I think so.
So as the Pevensies continue to follow, there's a little bit of a perspective shift here, because C.S. Lewis says that, Lucy can see him. Lucy says, he's beating his paw on the ground for us to hurry. But we don't get the perspective of Lucy at this point. We actually can't, as readers, don't hear. It's not like Lewis says, Aslan is beating his paw and telling Lucy to come. It's just that we only see it from Lucy's perspective, which I think really helps for me to put myself in the mind of Peter and Susan and Trumpkin, because
you're just watching.
Because you're just hearing Lucy say he's beating his paw, and you're like, Lucy, there's nobody there.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Even though I just read the last chapter, and I love the way that Lewis, has this perspective shift here.
Yeah. Also, let's talk about Susan saying, you've no right to try to force the rest of us like that. It's 4-1 and you're the youngest. Like, come on, Susan. And I think that's a direct support of my argument that Susan's growing up and it's affecting her belief.
Well, she also says, supposing I start behaving like Lucy, I might threaten to stay here whether the rest of you went on or not. I jolly well think I shall. And I just picture her with her arms crossed, like stamping her foot, like, fine, I'll do something just as annoying as she is.
It's like a desire to be more mature, to be older, but also like displaying immaturity.
Right after Susan has her little pouting session, we get this really, really profound thing. And again, Phil, I know it's profound, because 811 Kindle readers said it was profound. And that is, and so they got on the move. Lucy went first, biting her lip and trying not to say all the things she thought of saying to Susan. But she forgot them when she fixed her eyes on Aslan. I think 811 people were right. It really is a profound thing. I mean, I don't know about you, what's the first thing you think of when you hear that? She fixed her eyes on Aslan.
What comes to mind is fixing your eyes on Jesus. Stop worrying about what other people think or what they believe, and focus on your relationship with Christ.
Yeah, I mean, I went the same thing. I went to Hebrews 12, verses 1-3, which say this: since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart.
Wow.
I mean, this is almost like the personification of those three verses in fantasy form, right?
Yeah. Lucy has one job to do, and that is to follow Aslan. And she wants other people to walk with her, but even if they don't, she still has to go.
And what I love about this so much is it's not that she forgot about her fear that's coming. I'm sure maybe that happens as well too, but she's not worried about where Aslan's leading them. It's the fact that she forgets about all the frustration and all of the mean thoughts she has towards her own sister. It's like her own sin isn't even able to take hold of her. Like the brokenness within her it has no control over her because her eyes are fixed on Aslan. I think that's what's most beautiful, not even about not being afraid of what's to come, but the fact that her own brokenness as a daughter of Eve, right, is being pushed back by having her eyes on the lion.
And it's significant that it's being pushed back, because it's still there.
Oh, yeah.
And she's going to deal with it later, I'm sure. And that's so important to me, because I get, down on myself, because it's really frustrating when you fail over and over and over again. But when you turn your eyes to Jesus, then you can keep going. And you don't have to, it doesn't go away, it fades away and it gets pushed back. You're still a sinful person, but you're following Jesus, and that makes a huge difference.
Well, yeah, we literally hear the Pevensy's called. She's a daughter of Eve, so I think we can assume that she would be someone. I know it's not quite our world, but Lucy is marred by original sin, and so there's not eliminating sin completely from her life. She's a human. That's impossible. But the fact is, as she is fixing her eyes upon Aslan, all that sin, it does start to fall away. It's not that it'll ever be completely gone, not until she's in heaven, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's starting to have less and less of a hold on her. I would love to know, what if she just kept following Aslan? There wasn't a battle to fight against Miraz, and it was just, let's just follow Aslan. I think we'll find out more about that in the next book, but yeah, no more.
What have you read the Pilgrim's Progress?
I have read a children's version.
I was just gonna say
of the Pilgrim's Progress.
I haven't read it, but I've read the younger version.
Sure.
The one written for how old were you? 10?
No, I as an adult have read the third grade one. No,
well, that is embarrassing. No,
yeah, as a teacher, I've read the third grade version of the Pilgrim's Progress.
Okay, so I read it in third grade.
Okay,
so I think we probably read the same book.
Maybe.
A really impactful part of that book was when the burden that he's been carrying falls away.
Yeah,
it's taken from him. And when we were reading this passage, that imagery came back out of nowhere. And I had a very similar feeling that I had back in third grade, or I think it was third grade, whenever I read it. And just, that's so exciting. It's like a very clear, very simple thing, like fix your eyes on Jesus. And then you don't have to worry about everyone else. I'm reading some stuff right now, and I'm, hearing about other viewpoints, and just to hear people categorize Christianity a certain way is so hard to hear. And I want so bad for those people to know the Lord. And reading this passage kind of helps with that. It's like, well, like there's this person in particular, I can't even contact them because there's some famous author far away.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't need to be concerned about that as much, I guess.
Yeah. I also just want to take this time to plug one of my favorite bands, which have a song called "Fix My."
King's Kaleidoscope.
It is, yeah. Do you know that song?
What? Say the lyrics.
It's "I fix my eyes on you, the author and the finisher of our faith." It's directly from Hebrews 12. But yeah, listeners, if you haven't, I'm going to put a link in the description. One of my favorite bands, King's Kaleidoscope, has a song called "Fix My Eyes" that relates to this. It has nothing to do with Narnia, but everything to do with Hebrews 12. And if you have not listened to them, they are just one of the best group of musicians making music in any genre today. So I'll put some links to. I think they have more of an acoustic version of the song, and then a full band version. So I'll put both in the episode's description.
Sweet.
Has nothing to do with Narnia, but I want more people to listen to them.
Yeah. It's Narnia is connected to Hebrews. Hebrews is connected to
There you go.
It all makes sense.
And the tailbone is connected to the
the foot bone.
Yeah. Ooh. Are you sure, buddy?
Yeah. And you can rearrange everything.
Well, we'll let Trumpkin bring us back into the chapter here with his exclamation of cobbles and kettle drums. It's middle of the road one for me.
Yeah. Makes me think of kettle corn, which is gross. Just like Turkish delight.
Are you? That's a.
You like kettle corn? We gotta focus, dude.
We'll talk later.
We should not do this right before dinner.
Exactly.
Because it's bad enough after dinner.
So the Pevensies, they continue to follow Aslan. And it looks at one point, I love this, Lucy, it looks like Aslan's going to go off a cliff. Lucy continues to follow him and finds out that, no, he's not going off the cliff. But it even says, Lucy held her breath, for it looked as if he, referring to Aslan, had plunged over the cliff. But she was too busy keeping him in sight to stop and think about this. She's not letting herself get in the way. She's saying, I'm fixing my eyes on him. That's my purpose. Mm. And she finds out that Aslan actually has gone down a steep and narrow path that's going into the gorge between the rocks. And eventually, as I continue to follow Edmund, he can start seeing Aslan. He sees him first by a shadow, and then Peter catches a glimpse or two. And eventually, they do arrive at the hill they've been trying to get to since they could see it at Glasswater. And they arrive there, and all of the Pevensies and Trumpkin can see Aslan. Any thoughts before we jump into this conversation they're about to have?
Let's point out that Edmund trusts Lucy and follows where she's going, and then begins to see a shadow. He doesn't see Aslan all of a sudden. And then there's some splashing water, and when the water splashes, Peter thought he saw something, but he's still not sure, but he's already cheering for Lucy. He says 3 cheers for Lucy, or Lou. I love how he's slowly brought back into focus as they trust.
And Peter seems to still be humble, even when he's making mistakes. He's made a lot in this book already. But he does seem to be pretty quick to admit those and to apologize for his faults, which I think is a sign of him as a good leader, a good king here.
Yes.
Right? Well, let's dive into Aslan's interaction with each child, because he has something different to say to each one of them. And I think there's something there. So first, King Peter, he sees Aslan, he drops on one knee, and Aslan says, "My dear son." Then Aslan turns to Edmund and he says, "Well done."
That is awesome.
It is. Then he goes to Susan and he says, "You have listened to fears, child. Come, let me breathe on you. Forget them. Are you brave again?" And he doesn't say anything to Lucy. But then he does it. We'll skip trumpet. Let's talk about those three kids right there. What do you make of this? It sounded like you were very excited about his interaction with Edmund.
I was. Real quick about Peter.
Yeah.
My dear son brings to mind the prodigal son. He's not saying, he doesn't critique him. He just says, "My dear son." And he's glad he's there. No judgment or...
I hadn't thought about that. That's really good, dude.
Yeah.
I love it. He's Peter has made mistakes along the way, and he's just accepted. Just like actually, literally right behind me as we're recording this in my house is Rembrandt's painting of the Return of the Prodigal Son.
The original.
It's the original. I have it here in my house,
which is why we don't need sponsors.
Yeah, it's a print, which is a beautiful painting. I'll also link that in the description for people because I want to share good art.
Please be a picture of your
of my house, not the
dining
actual. But it's this that and. It's just a beautiful picture, not just obviously the painting that Rembrandt painted, but the story that Jesus tells of this father just rushing back, towards his son, thankful that he's returned. And that you're right. That's what we're getting here with Aslan, my dear son, to Peter, who has had a lot of doubts along the way.
Yeah. Now for Edmund, let's consider where he was at the beginning of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah.
Think about what he did and really think about it. He betrayed his friends for some, and his family for some
gross candy,
for some Turkish delight, was just like the worst.
Mm-hmm.
He was just the worst. And now he's at a point where he was the one who trusted Lucy, followed her, even helped convince the others to go without having seen Aslan. And then Aslan says, "Well done." So succinct, but so powerful.
Well, let's talk about Aslan's words towards Susan. So he says after an awful pause, in a deep voice says, "Susan." Susan doesn't answer. Others think that she's crying. And Aslan says, "You have listened to fears, child. Come, let me breathe on you. Forget them. Are you brave again?" And she says, "A little." And then he goes into another thing. What do you make of this, Phil?
Of what comes up next, or what he says?
Just what he says to her.
Lewis is using Aslan as the Christ figure.
Okay.
Right?
I've heard of this idea before.
No, it's kind of original. The way he is using it is so well done because what Aslan says isn't, she's not getting away with anything.
No, I mean, he calls her out. You've listened to your fears.
He states what she did.
Yeah.
And it's bad because she did something wrong. She didn't trust, she didn't believe. But he also works with her on that. He says, "Forget them," after breathing on her, and maybe help me out with the metaphor there, but he's like, "I'm here, this is very real," and hopefully setting her up for success next time.
I like that. I hadn't thought about when you said he breathes on her. Friend of the show, David Bates, over at Pints with Jack, when he was on last season, talked about Aslan's breath potentially being like the Holy Spirit. If we were to find the Holy Spirit in Narnia, maybe that's it. Do you remember him talking about that?
Now it's all connecting.
Do you think that's kind of like strength coming from the Holy Spirit here? Part of me was, I hadn't even thought about that now. This is a very non-processed thought here. I'm literally doing it here on the show. But I wonder if there's any connection between that.
Yeah, it seems like now you're in the presence of Aslan.
Yeah.
Get a re-up on the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. So then he goes on and he finds Trumpkin. He eats him, right?
He does. No more Trumpkin.
Trumpkin says, wraiths and wreckage. That's a great one. That's at the top of my list.
Obviously, Lewis was saving that one for a special moment. Or
like,
maybe Trumpkin was.
Oh, that's true. He says, come here, son of earth. Come here. And in my book, here is capitalized and bold. The first time in the book that any word has been bolded. Is it bolded in your copy?
It's not bolded. I don't know if they have that technology.
Okay. I mean, this is a big deal. And the last word was
capitalized.
There, and the last word was no longer the hint of a roar, but almost the real thing. What's going on through Aslan's head right now, Phil?
Through Aslan's head? I don't know.
You don't want to try to guess.
What's going on through Trumpkin's head?
I think I know what's going on through Trumpkin's head. He's terrified.
If I were Aslan, I would feel that he hasn't believed in me yet. I'm going to show him I'm real.
I think that's what's happening. I'm gonna show him what a lion is, right?
And play with him a little bit. Yeah,
and the kids know it. The kids who knew Aslan very well, they see that he liked the dwarf very much. And so they're not disturbed, but, Trumpkin is disturbed. I love this, though. I love this. It's talking about Trumpkin. He did the only sensible thing he could have done, and that is instead of bolting, he tottered toward Aslan. I love that. And the fear. I mean, that's we talk about the fear.
That takes nerve.
Yeah, and so many times in Scripture, we talk about the fear of God. And I think that's a really hard idea to understand. We think that means that we're just, walking around on eggshells like, oh, I don't want to make him mad because he might send some lightning my way. But this idea of like, in the fear of knowing how great the whole, of course he isn't safe, but he's good. Aslan is dangerous. He's this lion that's literally roaring at him. But because Aslan is so good, the only thing he can do, the only thing that makes sense is actually to move forward towards him, despite his fear. It's his fear that makes him go to him, not his fear that keeps him from running away.
Wow.
So they talk for just a little bit longer, and then Aslan sends off the Trumpkin and Peter and Edmund, and they're gone for the rest of the chapter.
They are.
Do you want to say anything to them before they leave?
They take their swords, they salute. We're curious what happens to them, but we have some other stuff coming
I'm not
up.
curious. I know what happens to him. You're curious.
For those of us who are holding back and reading one chapter at a
time. Any last thoughts about them as they're leaving?
No. Okay. I have a good image of the swords, the salute, and then they're off.
Are they running with the swords out, or they put them back in their sheaths? They definitely put them back, right?
I kind of imagine like a slow walk away with their swords drawn.
No, they definitely put them back, right?
It seems really awkward. Try to picture the scene. Pull your sword out, you salute,
and you put it back. That's not that hard. Why would you run with a sword?
Well,
you obviously have not been a teacher, because I'm thinking about all the kids with scissors running around in my classroom. It's just like, no, everybody put it away, put it away.
Everybody knows it would be very foolish to run with scissors.
It's very nice. So the boys have left, and Phil, we have arrived at this very interesting and maybe confusing and quite unparalleled passage in the Chronicles of Narnia. So I'm just going to dive in and read. Is that okay?
Yes.
The girls watched them out of sight, standing close beside Aslan. That's referring to the boys who were leaving. The light was changing. Low down in the east, Erebir, the morning star of Narnia, gleamed like a little moon. Aslan, who seemed larger than before, lifted his head, shook his mane, and roared. The sound, deep and throbbing at first like an organ beginning on a low note, it rose and became louder. And then far louder again, till the earth and the air were shaking with it. It rose from the hill and floated across all Narnia. Down in Miraz's camp, men woke, stared palely in one another's faces, and grasped their weapons. Down below that in the great river, now at its coldest hour, the heads and the shoulders of the nymphs and the great weedy, bearded head of the river god rose from the water. Beyond it, in every field and wood, the alert ears of rabbits rose from their holes, and the sleepy heads of birds came out from under wings. Owls hooted, vixens barked, hedgehogs grunted, the trees stirred.
Cows go moo. But the real question is, what does the fox say?
I'm just going to keep moving on. I'm going to ignore you.
A lot happens. And
Yeah.
I thought you might like to read that passage because it describes a lot of different things from a lot of different spots.
And it's kind of like a mountain and valleys of emotions, and like it's one of the things that, as a classroom teacher, I enjoy reading that because it's just like all the dynamics you get to use as you're reading it. It's just at the sound of his roar. I mean, I feel like this whole chapter is just biblical connection after biblical connection. To me, this is the trees of the field will clap their hands, right? This is the stones will cry. Paul was back in chapter 4 of this same book. The rocks will cry out. This is this. Aslan roars and Narnia responds.
Yes.
Can I keep reading?
Sure.
What Lucy and Susan saw was a dark something coming to them from almost every direction across the hills. It looked first like a black mist creeping on the ground, then like the stormy waves of a black sea rising higher and higher as it came on, and then at last, like what it was, woods on the move. All the trees of the world appeared to be rushing towards Aslan, but as they drew nearer, they looked less like trees, and when the whole crowd, bowing and curtsying and waving thin, long arms to Aslan, were all around Lucy, she saw that it was a crowd of human shapes. Pale birch girls were tossing their heads. Willow women pushed back their hair from the brooding faces to gaze on Aslan. The queenly beeches stood still and adored him. Shaggy oak men, lean and melancholy elms, shock-headed hollies, dark themselves, but their wives were all bright with berries, and gay rowans, all bowed and rose again, shouting, "Aslan! Aslan!" in their various husky or creaking or wave-like voices. Hey, do you think there's a theme of trees in this book, Phil?
I do.
It's
a subtle thing.
I'm not joking, and at the risk of embarrassing myself, I never noticed this until we did this season of the show.
Really?
I've read this book a couple of times, and it wasn't until I picked up my handy-dandy copy of Michael Ward's the Narnia Code and Planet Narnia that I picked up on this, and now I feel kind of silly that I've never, ever picked up on this. What do you make of what's happening here?
It's a muster.
Okay.
Everybody's getting together, and that seems exciting. What do you think?
Well, one of the things that's interesting to me, we pointed this out. I think I'm just name dropping guests left and right today.
Yeah.
When Anna was on the show, when Aslan came back.
Which one's Anna?
Don't do that.
You start over.
She pointed out, I think, which I think some listeners had also pointed out, which is that it's Susan and Lucy who go with Aslan to his death at the stone table, but they're also the first people to see him, just like we have women who were the first to meet Jesus after his resurrection, right? Again, here, a book later, it's the girls, it's Susan and Lucy who are with Aslan as we it almost is like literally the last chapter was called The Return of the Lion. This is Aslan's return to Narnia. And it's the girls who are with him again. That stood out to me. I don't know exactly what to make of it. There's not like a clear connection like in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe where it's like, oh, this is like the resurrection story. I'm not sure what that connection is, but it's just something I wanted to point out, I guess.
I think we're really primed to see stuff. Maybe not everything is super. The metaphor earlier was very heavy. Following Aslan and then having people follow Lucy. That was very clear. But some of them I think are more subtle.
So all of this is well and good. It's beautiful. It kind of makes sense. And it hasn't gotten weird yet. But it's about to get weird, right?
It's about to get real weird.
So Lucy is watching all of these people appear, and here's what the book says. One was a youth dressed only in a fawn skin, with vine leaves wreathed in his curly hair. His face would have been almost too pretty for a boy's if it had not looked so extremely wild. You felt, as Edmund said when he saw him a few days later, "There's a chap who might do anything, absolutely anything." He seemed to have a great many names. Bromius, Basaurus, and the Ram were 3 of them. There were a lot of girls with him as wild as he. There was even, unexpectedly, someone on a donkey, and everybody was laughing and everybody was shouting. How do you think you say that? It's like when you get to part of the Bible, you can't read one of the names of people.
I didn't realize everyone was saying that. I thought that was the donkey. Because the donkey goes, "Yaw, yaw."
I like that idea. Maybe the donkey is a talking donkey and he's saying it too.
But he only speaks yon, yon, yo, 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 ye. For those of you who don't have a copy of the book, it's EUAN, and then that word is twice, and then EU, oi, oi, oi.
Well, let me keep reading and then we'll go back to this. What made it more complicated was that the man on the donkey, who was old and enormously fat, began calling out at once, "Refreshments! Time for refreshments!" and falling off his donkey and being bundled on it again by the others, while the donkey was under the impression that the whole thing was a circus and tried to give a display of walking on its hind legs. And all the time there were more and more vine leaves everywhere, and soon not only leaves, but vines. They were climbing up everything. They were running up the legs of the tree people and circling around their necks. Lucy put out her hands to push back her hair and found she was pushing back vine branches. The donkey was a mass of them. His tail was completely entangled and something dark was knotting between his ears. Lucy looked again and saw it was a bunch of grapes. After that, it was mostly grapes, overhead and underfoot, and all around.
I'm getting lost rereading this chapter in a good way.
Okay.
I read this twice before we did this episode. This in the past 2 days.
Yeah.
And I'm enjoying this for the first time for some reason.
You didn't enjoy it last time? Oh, you mean like it's hitting you in a new way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, it was fine before, but this is really standing out to me now. And the language is very vivid.
Mm-hmm.
And just reading about the different types of characters, the energy. I think having you shout refreshments really...
It's like, wait, what's going on?
It really does. It feels like you're at a carnival, like the old kind of carnival.
And the weirdest thing about all of this is who is this? This is Bacchus and Silenus.
Yes.
So Bacchus
Tell me about them, because I don't have as much knowledge on them.
Yeah, that's fine. So Bacchus is the Roman. He's the god of wine. He's in Greek mythology is known as Dionysus. And Silenus is often he's like a companion to Bacchus. He's just a companion. That's the man that's on the donkey. So Bacchus is the boy that doesn't look like a boy but is, because and Silenus is the one on the donkey. I was doing research using the internet today. I don't know if you've heard about this.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was doing research and searching like Bacchus, Narnia, and just like, just that stuff that simple, I came across a lot of people. There was an outcry over, C.S. Lewis is putting pagan gods into his books, and he is trying to, I found a couple websites. They're like, C.S. Lewis was never a Christian. He was he was an atheist in disguise and all these other things.
Whoa.
And I think I understand why some people might have just a little bit of concern about Bacchus. He's the god of wine. They're throwing a big party. Bacchus used to throw a lot of adult parties, is how I'll say it.
Okay.
And that's obviously not what's happening here, but this is a weird inclusion in a children's book. Can we agree on that?
It is weird, and I felt a similar discomfort. Or just, I was
You
confused.
still believe Lewis is a Christian, so we can agree on that?
All I'm saying is, if that were true, the titles of his books would make a little more sense.
Okay. If he is a
Mere
Christian.
Christianity?
Yeah.
The Great Divorce? What? Just kidding.
But there's got to be a point to this, right? There's got to be something that Lewis is doing here. So let's talk through this, okay? Luckily, like I said at the beginning of the chapter, I've pulled from people who are much smarter than you and I, so it's not you and me just mumbling or trying to figure out what's happening here.
Can I take one guess?
Sure. No, please. Take a couple.
It reminds.
We got all day. How far into the show are we right now?
one thing that comes to mind is Zacchaeus and Jesus going to Zacchaeus' house.
Okay.
I think that would have been unusual for someone who is claiming to be God. And, of course, in that point in the story of the Bible, I don't know how many people knew that, but here's someone who is a religious teacher, at least, and he is going to a tax collector's house.
He's hanging out with the sinners.
And when you consider that he was hanging out with all these sinners, now everyone's a sinner, but these were people that were being blatant about it. That's what this scene brings to mind. What do you
Interesting. My take is a little bit different, just from a surface level of just knowing a little bit about Bacchus. I didn't take it that way because I don't think this is the same kind of Bacchus that we read about in Roman mythology. I think this is he's been reformed, if you will, by C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
Yes, he's there with the grapes and the vines and stuff, but it's not like we don't hear all
They're
kinds
not
of
fermented grapes.
I think they are. I think they are. That's the thing. But they're the things that he would have been associated with that would not be things that I think Aslan would approve of. We don't hear about that here. So I don't think that part's happening. I don't think that's the Bacchus that Lewis has written into his story. I think, yes, he shares some of those same things. So I think Lewis is doing something different. Although I like your idea that if, this is the Bacchus, the Dionysus that we know from Roman and Greek mythology, that it's like, Jesus was with sinners. And so maybe that's what's happening here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to link an article. Again, I'm linking a lot of stuff. I got a lot of work to do in the post-production here. I came across...
You have to paste 3 links.
It's so hard. So in doing research about this, trying to learn a little bit more about what might be happening here, I came across an article by Josh McNall, who is an associate professor at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. He makes 3 points about how Lewis saved Bacchus, and one of them I already mentioned, which is that Bacchus seems to not be the same Bacchus that we know from Roman mythology. All of the things that we would associate with him that are not good, he doesn't seem to have. The second thing is we even know that Lewis is slightly critical of Bacchus because the chapter ends with Susan and Lucy not feeling comfortable if Aslan wasn't there. So he's not even saying everything that's happening here is great because the girls feel slightly uncomfortable. And then the third thing has a lot to do with Lewis's idea that Christianity is the true myth, right? And so if Christianity is true, if the ideas within it are universal, like go back to you just mentioned, you were joking about mere Christianity, but he talks about this, then they have to be true everywhere. And that means that some people are going to get just some of it right. Even pagan stories, fairy tales, things that are not at all associated with Christianity are going to have aspects of them that point back to what Lewis would call the true myth because it's true and you can't run away from it. And so Lewis would be pulling from some of those pagan ideas because his idea would be, well, there are probably some things that are good about that, and we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing. And so he goes on, and a couple other people I read from as well mention this idea that Lewis is pointing to this truth that there should be joy in Christ, that there should be absolute joy in celebrating his presence and his return. And it's this idea of it. A lot of times we get mixed up and we go, oh, like Christianity is really hard, and there's a lot of things we can't do because we're Christians, and we forget about like the absolute joy and freedom that we have.
I think one of the benefits of reading a book like this is it's a reminder, and it's a reminder in a different way. So sure, we have the Bible, and we should be reading that, but it's also nice to have it put into a story because we learn well from stories.
Yeah. And in that same article, Josh McNall writes this, which I thought was really, really groundbreaking to me. In John 2, Jesus' first miraculous sign is not the healing of a leper, the raising of the dead, or the restoration of lost sight. Instead, it is the creation of over 120 gallons of the headiest wine imaginable, enough to overflow 3 bathtubs, and this to keep a dying party from going dry. There is much symbolism here, but as Tim Keller notes in the best sermon I have heard on this text, one intended echo may have been the Dionysian tales of the hills running with wine and revelry. In this miracle, Christ was showing himself to be the true Lord of the wine and the true bringer of festival joy. This matters, as Keller says, because most people reject Jesus for the wrong reasons. They do so because they fear that it will cost them mirth. Yet as both the psalmists and the Maeonids knew, in the presence of the divine, and this is from Psalm 16, there is fullness of joy at your right hand, are pleasures forevermore. Isn't that so great?
That's really good.
And I'm going to, so again, I want to be very clear. These were Josh McNall's ideas. If you're listening, Josh, we'd love to have you on the show. I will link to the whole article for listeners to take a look at. It's really great and really profound. But I'll also put a link to Tim Keller, one of my favorite pastors, one of my favorite preachers, and I've found the link on YouTube, and so I'll link to that sermon if anyone would like to listen to that. What do you make of all this, Phil? I just kind of threw a lot at you. What do we do with this?
The reminder of joy is really important to me because it is difficult to even attempt to not do certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really frustrating when you see someone who is doing all those things that you're trying to stay away from, and it doesn't seem like it's affecting them too much. But what the passage you just read reminds me is we have a real freedom in Christ because we're not slaves to those things.
Mm-hmm.
And those things, once you make certain choices, you are a slave to that. And I'm really reminded that there's so much joy in Christ. And it's a well-needed, well-timed and needed reminder.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, I am just blown away by C.S. Lewis. I'm blown away, obviously, by his writing and the ideas he's putting together. And I just love doing this. I love finding these things that I breeze through this every time. And now that you and I are taking this one chapter at a time, I'm finding these things which honestly are helping me in my walk with the Lord. I don't think I actually thought that was going to happen as you and I made this podcast that would really affect my relationship with God. But it's like these things are really, they're doing a lot.
I was thinking the same thing earlier when you were sharing about, I think we were talking about like the burden being thrown off.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense looking back that this would inform our life with Christ. But tonight in particular, this chapter that we're reading seems really pointed at us.
Well, Phil, do you have any last thoughts? Because that's where the chapter ends. The girls say, I don't really feel safe with Bacchus and all his wild girls if we met them without Aslan. And Lucy says, I should think not. And that's where it ends.
That's it from me.
So like I said, where we end the episode is Peter, Edmund, and Trumpkin heading off to meet Caspian at Aslan's house, and Susan and Lucy are watching the celebration with Aslan. So we've splintered our Pevensies off again. Are you excited? This is what you thought this was happening in chapter 8, and here it is, chapter 12. We finally will have Peter and Caspian meet.
Are you sure?
Well, it sounds like it's probably going to happen.
Okay. It's not in the title, so I'm never sure.
What do you think that's going to be like? Just, I know listeners have asked for you to make a couple, guesses about what comes next.
I think it's battle time.
You think they're going to fight each other, or you mean they're going to fight Miraz?
Miraz. Okay.
You think they're just going to hit it off right off the bat? They're going to get together and be like, yay, even though we're both kings, we'll both be friends, and it'll be great.
Yeah, it's like everyone had their own movie, and now they're all coming together to fight some evil force.
We just saw Endgame recently.
Can you tell?
Yeah. All right, well, we will be back next time with Chapter 12, Sorcery and Sudden Vengeance. And in that chapter, Nickabrick turns to dark companions to aid the Narnians. Excited about that?
Yes.
Great. Well, listeners, you can follow us into Narnia on our Twitter or Facebook pages. If you have any listener feedback, we love receiving that. You can email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. We also appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts because it helps other listeners find the show and join together in our read-through. Also, make sure you've subscribed to the show in your favorite podcast app so you can wake up every other Wednesday with a new episode. Our show's themes were created by Kevin MacLeod, and you can find more of his work in the links in the episode's description. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we'll be back next time with Chapter 12.